Okay, this video is about Airstream mechanisms. So in it, we're going to look at the five different Airstreams that are possible, and we're going to look at which ones participate in linguistic contrasts, exactly how they work in terms of the physiology, how they're transcribed. We'll have examples of how they sound, all of that. So first, let's just look at the different things that can produce airstream mechanisms. Basically, an airstream mechanism is a way of moving stuff around. Air movement is crucial to all of the sounds that we make in spoken language. So we can move air around with the lungs. These are pulmonic airstreams where we're using the lungs to move air around. We can push the air out. This is the vast majority of the sounds of the world's languages. Every language has most of its sounds are produced with pulmonic egressive sound. Some languages, like English, all of the sounds are pulmonic egressive sounds. And so all of the sounds that I'm producing now are pulmonic egressive. We can do pulmonic ingressive, which means we're using the lungs to draw air in while we're articulating our sounds. This is never used contrastively in the world's languages. So there's no language that says, okay, there's a distinction between these two words, and the distinction is in this one we have a pulmonic egressive sound, and in this one we have an ingressive sound. That never happens. And here I'll demonstrate pulmonic ingressives, and maybe it'll become obvious why. So here's egressive, and then ingressive speech sounds like. Right, that's me trying to produce speech sounds while I'm inhaling, right? Pulmonic and drawing air in using the lungs. Our vocal folds just aren't really structured in a way that allows a natural kind of vibration. For example, for voice sounds, as air is going that way, they're structured more for air going that way. And of course, the vast majority of our practice speaking is with egressive airflow. So yeah, and I always have to clear my throat after doing that. It's just doesn't work. It's very difficult. It'd be a lot of effort to switch between those two airstreams during speech. So pulmonic egressive airflow is used in language. Pulmonic ingressive, not so much. Next, we have glottalic airflows. Now we have two glottalic mechanisms. One egressive and one ingressive. The glottalic egressive sounds, these are also known as ejectives. They sound like the consonants in right? So we can do it with stops, fricatives. They're always voiceless, and here's how it happens. First, you form an oral constriction, usually a stop, but like I said, some languages have ejective fricatives. And while that constriction is formed, you close off the glottis, like for a glottal stop. Now, with both of those things closed, you then raise the glottis, and that pushes the column of air between the glottis and the constriction. If it's a stop, it compresses that air because you're reducing the volume that it's supposed to be contained. And then you release the oral constriction, and you get that pop. So, ah, ah. And if it's a fricative, stuff like that. Okay? This is transcribed with an apostrophe after the symbol for the voiceless obstruent, the stop or fricative. Okay, so that's glottalic egressives, also known as ejectives. Glottalic ingressive airstream mechanism, we know these sounds as implosives. Now these sounds are typically voiced, and they're produced, so sounds like blah, da, blah. So you form the oral closure, and these are, as far as I know, all stops, so stop closure. You constrict the glottis and you pull the glottis down, and this forms an air differential, right? So you're pulling it past the air in that way. And the combination of the negative air pressure, because you're pulling down, you're increasing this space, and the changing position of the larynx, which lengthens the vocal tract somewhat, this affects the sound of the consonant and gives it that very distinctive kind of gulping sound, is how I get it subjectively. Bah, and so on. Uh, and these, let's switch over. We have one set left, but I want to show you the symbols for these. So there's the ejectives. Um, Pulmonic egressives, we don't have a symbol for them. They're just the regular symbols. The ingressives have their voiceless plosives with this right curving hook at the top. Ba, la, ga, la, la. Okay, so that's the implosives. And you can try with the glottalic egressives, the ejectives and the implosives, the ingressives. If you can feel your larynx and then do a uh, uh, you might even, if I hold my finger here, you might even be able to see my larynx pop up. Ah, ah, ah. Right? It's pushing up. It's not a lot, but it's enough to produce that pressure that does the ejective. And similarly for the ingressives. Oh, no, no. Right? It comes up and then it pulls down during that sound. Um, okay, so that's the glottalic airstream mechanisms. Uh, the last, we had two pulmonic uh, mechanisms, two glottalic mechanisms, and we have our fifth and final airstream mechanism is the velaric ingressive. And this is used for the clicks. So you may already know how to make this, but let's go through the description, the anatomical description of what's happening. First, there's a closure of the oral cavity at the velum or uvulus. The back of the tongue closes off back there, as it would for producing a velar or uvular stop, like k or g. And then you make a second closure forward of this. It can be at the lips, alveolar ridge, uh, palato-alveolar region. Can't really be much further than that because the other thing you have to do is in the space between those closures, you have to pull the body of the tongue down. And this forms a low pressure space, right? It's closed off at both ends, so there's no way for air to get in, but you're increasing the size of that volume. So the pressure is dropping inside that space. And then you release the anterior closure, that means the one in front, and that makes that click noise as the air rushes in. So you have, okay, and then the posterior constriction is released. Now, I am not remotely fluent in any language that uses clicks, but they are consonants, so you can be running along through your pronunciation and throw in a click. It's a slightly complicated articulation, but it's just part of the consonant inventory in languages that have clicks. Now, now, things like that. Um, so there are basically five different click symbols in the IPA click sounds that we represent. The bilabial click, that's that bullseye. The dental click, that's the vertical pipe, so it's longer than just an L. Post-alveolar or alveolar click with the exclamation point. There's a palato-alveolar with a pipe with a double-barred pipe is what it's described, and the alveolar lateral. Uh, so the lateral one has, instead of releasing in the middle, it releases along the side. So that's instead of, right? And I am not great at producing all of the distinctions between those five clicks. Another thing to keep in mind is the click articulation entirely happens at the sort of velum uvula area and forward. So anything behind that, anything can be happening. You can open or close the velopharyngeal ports. You can have nasal clicks and oral clicks. You can have voiced or voiceless clicks. And that's happening at the same time as the click articulation. So often what you see is a velar consonant, a velar stop consonant, such as K, G, or the N with that tail, next to the click symbol to distinguish between different clicks, because there are languages that have various different click series based on what else is going on behind the click articulation at the same time. Lots of really interesting stuff happening. Um, I do want to point out here in the textbook, table 6.3, it lists five different types of stops that we now know about. We have the plosives, that's the oral stops like p, b, k, g, and so on. We have the nasal stops, or just nasal consonants like ñ, and so on. We have ejective stops, we have implosives, and we have clicks. All of these involve complete closure in the oral cavity. Of course, not all ejectives are stops, but there are ejective stops. So we have 5 different types of stops. The table in the textbook is mislabeled. It's called a taxonomy of the 5 different types of plosives, but it actually means stops. And you see that in the discussion in the textbook. It was just a mislabeling of the table, but I don't want you to be thinking these are all plosives. A plosive is an oral stop using the pulmonic egressive airstream mechanism. Everything else has its own label. Okay. In the description of this video, I'm linking a couple of the feature maps from the World Atlas of Linguistic Structures, the WALS. One that looks at it points out where we find ejectives and implosives across the world's languages, and another one that lists some aspects of where clicks show up. There's some other things in these maps, but you'll be able to see that from the legend which ones these sounds that we're particularly interested in. So have a look at that. It is kind of interesting to see geographical clustering of some of these things, but these are by no means extremely rare things. They're rarer than pulmonic airstream mechanisms, but they do happen quite a lot. So enjoy.